Use your imagination for a second and build the craziest camera you could possibly think of. What would it have? For me, I would definitely want it to have 16-bit color, a crap ton of dynamic range, at least 15 stops, 100 megapixel photos, and I want it to do 4K RAW internal recording. Oh, but I also want it to be done on the biggest sensor you could possibly find, bigger than the Alexa 65. Well, imagine no more, because it already exists. This is the Hasselblad H6D100C, and it could be the greatest camera ever made. Not too long ago, I was able to purchase my dream camera, a Red Weapon Monstro, Red's former flagship cinema camera with a ridiculous amount of dynamic range, a monstrously sized VistaVision sensor, and when it was released, it came out for nearly a whopping $80,000. Today, though, you can pick up, like me, a used kit that costs roughly the same as a body-only Komodo X. And this got me wondering, are there any other insane cameras from the past that have depreciated to the point of being actually affordable? And that led me to this, the Hasselblad H6D100C. A camera that when it came out 8 years ago cost $32,000, and that was just for the body. Its flagship feature, of course, a sensor that is bigger than the Alexa 265. On paper, you have what could be the most insane camera ever made. Those specs that I read off earlier, those are all true. 100 megapixels, 15 stops of dynamic range, 16-bit color, 4K RAW internal recording, all on a sensor that's about the size of my palm. In the last 8 years, there is only one other camera that I can think of that even comes close to that, and that is the new Fuji GFX 100 Mark II. One of the most interesting parts about this camera is, well, all of its parts. It's got modularity that's rarely seen outside of the cinema camera world. The hand grip, which is also the body, is removable. The viewfinder is also removable, and the sensor back is also removable. So all of these parts are somewhat exchangeable. If you don't like the viewfinder that it comes with, you could exchange it for a waist level one. If something were to happen to this massive sensor, well, you could replace it, or replace it with a smaller one if you wanted to, or if you're feeling froggy, you could replace this with a 645 film back and go to town. The camera shoots to SD card and CFast card, and whether you're shooting photo or video, those files are massive. On the other side of the camera is where we have the I/O. And we've got a headphone in and a mic in for audio. You've got power in and out. You've got a USB-C port for tethering your camera to the computer, which is very handy if you're shooting in a studio. And then finally, we've got a mini HDMI port, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You also get a host of buttons around the grip that controls the body. You've got white balance, autofocus modes, your ISO, a couple of other buttons like playback, turning on and off the camera. Plus you have scroll wheels on your thumb and behind the thumb, in the front and the back, and that's for controlling aperture and shutter speed. You've also got a pop-up flash. Who cares though, right? Like, nobody is here watching this video to see me talk about the body and the buttons and a pop-up flash. You want to know what it's like to shoot on and how good is the image. Well, thankfully I live here in Utah, and I thought a camera like this deserves some epic locations to be shot at. For the next 4 days, I took the Hasselblad H6D100C to Antelope Island, the Moon, Swing Arm City, and Goblin Valley to see if shooting with this massive sensor is actually worth it, or is the medium format look just hype? The most surprising aspect of this camera is not the image. It's how ridiculously fun this camera is to shoot. Two reasons for this. Number one, the viewfinder. The viewfinder is wonderful to use. It's so incredibly easy to see out of and nail focus with, plus all of your exposure tools are viewable at the bottom of the display. The second reason, and the bigger reason, is the wonderful sound this thing makes. It is not subtle. The camera has a mirror in it, and when that mirror slaps up, it makes this incredible noise. There's something to be said about the feeling you get when you're a part of this process.
Oh, I love that shutter.
This camera is slower, but not as slow as you would expect. It does have autofocus and true depth autofocus, but I never used it. I like manually focusing more. I find on this camera, manual focus is both faster and more reliable. Because of the massively sized sensor, you gain a few things. A massive amount of dynamic range. We're talking massive. I say that word a lot. Depth of field is wildly shallow. At f4, you're looking at what feels like an f1.2 equivalent on a full frame lens. You're also getting a much wider field of view. Speaking of lenses, the kit that I purchased from Pictureline here in Salt Lake City came with these 5 lenses. It came with the 120 macro, the 80 f2.8, this is the only orange dot lens of the group, the 100mm f2.2, the 300 4.5, and finally the only zoom out of the bunch, the 50 to 110. If you are thinking about getting into the system, I would highly recommend acquiring the orange dots, and there are 2 big reasons why. First of all, lifespan. Hasselblad uses the leaf shutter lenses, so the shutter is in the lens, so there is a moving mechanism in the lens. But when they went to an orange dot, you got 1,000,000 actuations. It is not uncommon to go onto a place like MPB and look for lenses like these and see them with, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 shutter actuations. And if you know that they are capable of 1,000,000, well, that's pittance, like that's nothing to this lens. The second reason that you would want to get the orange dot is because the non-orange dot lenses are limited to 1/800th of a second on the shutter speed, whereas with the orange dots, they updated that to 1/2000th of a second. Hasselblad made a really famous camera called the X-Pan cam. If you're watching, this might be the digital X-Pan that you're looking for. With this size of a sensor, this is probably the closest you're getting to it. But this one, of course, can do the X-Pan crop ratio. And if you put it into live view, then it's really easy to see that composition. My favorite lens out of the bunch was this 100mm f2.2, followed by the 50 to 110. Zooming out to 50 is incredibly wide. It feels more like a 15mm and it renders beautifully. The color. Hasselblad's natural color science deserves its praise. This is the best color straight out of camera that I've ever worked with. Let's be honest, the prospect of being Roger Deakins and shooting on a camera with an Arri 65 size sensor is very intriguing and a major contributing factor as to why I bought this camera. Someone on Threads, when I posted that I was making a video about the video capabilities of this camera, said it can't really be as straightforward as just hitting the record button, can it? And it is. It's wild. But it's also not. Let's discuss. Shooting video is very straightforward. Go into modes and select video, then hit record. That's it. But I'd suggest taking advantage of the mini HDMI port and pair this with a monitor like this Atomos Shinobi. There is no way of getting a proper exposure without one. You do have in camera though, focus peaking, which is nice. Also, the camera only shoots in 24p, but more on that later. And it doesn't have shutter angle, just shutter speed, and no option for 1/48, so you'll have to go with 50. Once you've finished with a clip, you can hit play and get playback on your monitor. Once again, the image quality is fantastic and the colors are incredible straight out of camera. But it's not perfect, and these weird imperfections only come out in post. A couple of the statements people made were, 1, you can't do video, and 2, it's not RAW because you can't change ISO and white balance. And you can't change ISO in this version or the most current version. However, you could change white balance. You just come in here, make an adjustment, and in the most current version, you would see the adjustment taking place in real time. It was actually really cool. And more so than other RAWs, even like Red Code RAW, where you can change the white balance and the ISO, you can change everything that you could change on a photo. Do you want to change the shadow fill, the highlight recovery, clarity, detail, sharpness? Do you want to add film grain? Do you need to get rid of dust? You could do all of that to this which was so huge. I don't know what happened. I wish I could show you. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the weird though, because while it is easy to record video, there are some serious quirks you're gonna have to work around. The first being shooting indoors versus shooting outdoors. And let me be the first to say, I don't know why this is happening. Like the technical reasons, over my head, I'm not that guy. But for whatever reason, when you're shooting indoors, you can see visible light waves. So I've kind of either boiled it down to the LED source or the leaf shutter. I'm not sure. But it's not something that you'll see outdoors. A very common concern when trying to shoot on medium or large format is rolling shutter. And obviously this is no different. When I was doing some handheld work, it didn't look that great. However, when I put it on my tripod and panned pretty fast side to side, it wasn't bad at all. Finally, the biggest quirk is the noise. Listen to this thing. It sounds like a film camera, so you better be prepared to film externally if you want audio. We hear all the time that large and medium format have a look, and they do, but it's not a look that you can't replicate to some degree. Now, I'm not the technical savant here to explain this subject properly. If you're looking for that, I would definitely check out Media Division's videos that they've done on this subject. They were excellent. They actually built a larger than IMAX 200 megapixel camera to kind of prove this. Also, there is a really great current video by a channel called Chagall. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. I do have some examples though, maybe the most compelling of which are these. Here are two clips, one shot with the H6D and one shot with the Red Komodo X. There's a massive difference in sensor size here, but can you actually tell a difference? Can you actually tell which is which? It really comes down to math, and again, I'm not the math guy. If, like me, you struggle with figuring out the necessary crop factors to achieve a relative field of view and a relative depth of field at a certain f-stop from a smaller sensor to a bigger sensor, might I suggest using Phil Holland's website and his tool Format Compare. If you don't know who Phil Holland is, Phil is widely known for his incredible breadth of knowledge. And this Format Compare tool, which is free, along with a ton of other tools that he offers, it was incredibly helpful for me making this video. Thank you so much, Phil. Your website is amazing. What it boils down to though is if you find a lens that is both wide enough and fast enough, you can replicate the look of large or medium format with a smaller sized sensor. However, in my personal opinion, there are a few things that are much more difficult to replicate. That would be tonality, that would be color. And there are very few cameras out there with smaller sensors that could also achieve the same amount of dynamic range. Going back to these clips, the top is the H6D. There were a lot of people that got this wrong when I posted a poll on my Instagram and Threads. What is most impressive to me is the color. It's bang on. Despite it not having log, straight out of camera, the color is insane. So is this then a viable, affordable way to do large format video capture? No, not really. And it's not really because of the sensor size. I mean, it is, but in a roundabout way. You see, it's the lens selection. To find a lens that actually covers an image this big, an image circle this big, is very difficult. Hasselblad's own HC lenses, the lens selection is very small. And if you find a different company that makes a lens that can fit this image circle, adapting it to this system is not very straightforward. I'd say right now, your only option to shoot medium format photo and video is Fuji's GFX 100 Mark II. Yes, I shot it, but barely. I know this is gonna piss some people off. I don't care. While the files and photos and the video are good, not as good as the H6D, that is the most lifeless camera I have ever used. Pushing the buttons felt like I imagine it would feel like to poke a dead body with a stick. This camera, despite it being a ticking time bomb, you see they don't even support the H system anymore, and unfortunately this camera does have to go back for repair. It's got a sensor issue. It needs to be recalibrated. And hell, it didn't even work half the time because of the cold.
It's finally starting to warm up, which is nice, but it's still too cold to really use this. I'll fire off a photo, maybe two, and then it has an error. It reads that there is no card. It tells me to save the logs, remove the battery, and try it again.
I would choose it nearly every single time over the GFX because it is that much fun and the files are so good. Before I finish, I just want to say a massive thank you to Pictureline here in Salt Lake. You know, they heard my idea for this video and they did not have a camera. Somehow they allocated one in a kit with all those lenses, batteries, you name it, and got it to me for an insane deal. If you're in Salt Lake and you're not using Pictureline, you're shooting yourself in the foot. If you've got any questions at all on the Hasselblad H6D or any of the photos or the video you saw, please let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, do me a solid and hit the like button and consider subscribing if you like the video, of course. It's free, there's no pressure, you can cancel at any time. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.